Yes, sir.
Yes, we are good to go.
Okay, Aditi, over to you. Once Jayant is there, I will introduce him into the room.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for India Internet Governance Forum session on building trust online for a digitally empowered South Asia. As South Asia races towards becoming entirely digitalized, it raises questions of how trustworthy the systems, processes, and different players are. The aim of the panel is to look at how trust online is and can be built between citizens and state, between different states, and between users and companies. Certain laws and policies allow for this trust to be built, while others potentially inhibit it. There are also extenuating circumstances such as developing international standards and the dependence on global supply chains to enable this journey towards digitalization. We saw much of this play out during COVID as global supply chains were disrupted all over the world. The impact of a few nations on these supply chains, as well as their quote unquote ulterior motives, can no longer be ignored. In such a scenario, how do we trust the online space and trust each other in the digital world? We have a stellar and diverse panel before you to represent different parts of South Asia, including India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. I will first introduce the panel members and then open the floor for them to deliver their opening remarks. I request all the panel members to keep their remarks to under 3 minutes so that we can have a discussion after that, as well as open the floor for audience questions. Our first panelist is Mr. Sami Ahmed, who's the Managing Director and CEO of Startup Bangladesh, a government of Bangladesh funded VC firm that backs local startups. He has also been the executive director of Bangladesh Association of Software and Information Services, one of the leading industries associations in Bangladesh. Our second panelist is Mr. Shumon Ahmed Sabir, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Fiber at Home, a leading telecommunication services provider in Bangladesh. He's also a member of Bangladesh and Executive Council APNIC. Our third panelist is Mr. Jayant Fernando, who's the chairperson of Sri Lanka's Computer Emergency Response Team and advisor to the ICT Agency of Sri Lanka. Our fourth panelist is Mr. Anand Raj Khanal, who is the former director of Nepal's Telecommunications Authority. And last but not the least, from India, we have Dr. Gulshan Rai, who's the former and the first National Cybersecurity Coordinator in the Prime Minister's Office and the former Director General of India's CERT-In. Mr. Ahmed, I'd like to begin with you, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So just a quick, I know you have given my intro. I'm the Managing Director of Startup Bangladesh, which is a government of Bangladesh-owned VC firm. We fund local innovations. We support them in the VC space. And not only that, we are also working with policy and many other acting as a bridge between government and startups. And definitely building trust online is a big issue for our startups because 90% of our startups are digital startups that are in the online space, right? So it's very important where Startup Bangladesh plays a role is in building this trust. When individuals see that it's a Startup Bangladesh funded or a government supported company, it obviously helps them build the trust. But talking about trust online, if we see in Bangladesh, 10 years ago, the trust issue was, okay, do I buy online? Is this a valid e-commerce company? Or if I buy a product from e-commerce sites, is this an authentic product I'm going to get? Or what's the issue, right? That was the big problem if you look at 10 years ago, or even more, 10, 12 years ago, right? But that problem has been solved to some extent. We don't see those type of issues coming up. And maybe the COVID period played a big role in that particular sense in bringing trust to individuals when buying online. That's one of the parts, right? But what we see more right now is the misinformation on the online space, especially across social media, that has created a huge issue in Bangladesh. Do we trust the information that we see? And of course, part of it is digital literacy of an individual, how they take that information that they see online. So do we address it by improving digital literacy? Because most of the social media is not located in Bangladesh, or they do work closely with the government in some aspect, but most of these platforms obviously are global platforms, right? And people have a lot of freedom of speech, which can be misunderstood in many areas because somebody making a comment which may not be true may result in creating a lot of issues in the local market, right? Even has resulted in people's death, if I may say, in due to certain circumstances because of misinformation. So how do we control it? How do governments go about managing that issue? And I think it's a South Asian issue more than any other part of the world, because how people in South Asia react to many of these things are very similar across, if it's Bangladesh or India or Sri Lanka, doesn't matter. So I think one of the issues that we're dealing with, a couple of things, is that do we need our own social media? That's one, right? And then if we do need our own social media, how do we go about it? Or do we enforce these global social media platforms to have their servers in Bangladesh? But does that mean that there will be too much government control? Or is that a good thing? Is it something that for us to respond to? So these are things that we're discussing. It's not things that we will do, but these are things that we're discussing in the cards, along with the Data Protection Act that is also in the cards for Bangladesh right now, is that if we do need one, what is the best way to go about it? So currently we are drafting one Data Policy Act, and we are sharing with different stakeholders to get their feedback to figure out what's best for Bangladesh. So it's not something maybe will come out in the next year or two. Maybe it'll take some more time. But while we do these interactions with different organizations, individuals, to figure out where Bangladesh should go forward in this particular space. I believe my 3 minutes are up, but
Yes.
I'm happy to stay on and discuss.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Aditi,
Ahmed.
just a moment. Admin, can you upgrade Dr. Gulshan Rai, please, as panelist? Over to you, Aditi.
Yes, thank you, Amrita. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. I think you touched on a lot of issues that I'm hoping to get to during our discussion. But before we do that, we have Mr. Kanal from Nepal next.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I have two aspects to contribute in this panel discussion. The first is what we understand by digital trust online. I look into two perspectives from it. The first one is the cybersecurity context, which is very important, that our data is secure, our transactions are secure, the whole network is secure, applications are secure. The second aspect is consumer experience. If you are connecting to any kind of products and services online, what is your experience? That counts a lot. Whether there is ease of use, whether it is a mobile app or a website or an API, the consumer experience matters when building trust online. So this is one aspect of the things that I would like to highlight here. Second aspect is if we want South Asia to be digitally empowered, then we have to see what are the fundamental pillars of digital economy that we should look into. That will contribute not only to the digital economy, but to the overall trust. These are, I list them as digital infrastructure, the accessibility of broadband infrastructure, their availability, their affordability, so on and so forth. Second one is how business has been digitalized, how operations have been digitalized across government, across private sectors, and how people are into the digital business. Third one is there a reliable, trustworthy digital public platforms that have been built, or whether these platforms are developed in silos, not integrated, and not seen from the whole of the government approach. That is third aspect that we have to see. The fourth one is digital financial services, or the fintech, how pervasive it is, how people are confident in using the digital financial services. And the fifth one I look at is digital skills, which is one of the barrier for adoption of the ICT services online. And the fifth, the last one is the trust environment. So I connect these five fundamental pillars of digital economy for digitally empowered South Asia, and then put the trust from two perspectives. That is, one from the customer experience perspective while they are online getting services or interacting with whether it's a government or business or cross-border, and the security, the privacy of data, whether they are confident in using it. do that. And one of the studies shows that only 31% of the people in Asia Pacific are confident that the organizations who collect their personal data are trustworthy. So this is a very serious research finding that we have to look into. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Kanal.
Sorry, once
Yes.
again, Dr. Gulshan Rai, will you just try to test your audio? Speak once. I want to hear you. Can you try speaking, Dr. Rai? Okay, someone will call you up. I think we cannot hear you. Someone will call you up.
Okay. Amrita, should I proceed?
Gulshan Rai is
Yes.
muted, so we might not be able to.
Yes, admin, can you unmute Dr. Rai, please? Dr. Gulshan Rai.
I think interestingly, that raises the question
Yes.
whether video conferencing platforms can be trusted or not when it comes to running when they must. And they always choose to stick with irony and go out during times when they should be trusted. But we'll
I
wait
think
for-
you go on. I will just try to resolve this. Sorry
Sure.
for this.
No problem, Amrita. It happens.
I'm
Thank
not able to unmute.
Okay, I think as the IGF team and Dr. Rai figured out the audio issues, I think Mr. Kanal raised a very good point about creating trustworthy digital public goods, which is something that India has been looking at quite extensively. We'll come to discussion about that. But before that, I'd like to invite Mr. Fernando to deliver his opening remarks. And I must correct myself, he's the founder, chairperson of Sri Lanka's CERT. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aditi. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be part of this esteemed panel with all the distinguished panelists from India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and this entire region, Pakistan included. And I'm happy to be part of it, to see old friends and former colleagues like Dr. Gulshan Rai also on this panel. So thank you very much to IGF India for putting this together. So enabling trust online and enabling the trust ecosystem has been very much in our thoughts in our part of the world. Sri Lanka, as you know, is one of the smaller countries in the region. And we believe from an economic development perspective that creating trust and confidence amongst the entire digital ecosystem and among stakeholders can be ensured if we adopt international standards or global benchmark standards in our domestic policy and legal framework, so that we will be able to interact and develop collaboration with digital platforms and service providers globally. From a smaller country perspective, and when we want to boost the economy on a framework that the people can benefit and the business can benefit, and also where the government can interact on an equal footing, it is a must for us to think about global standards and global norms. In that context, I just want to flag 2-3 examples and finish this round at this moment, Aditi. So firstly, in formulating our Electronic Transactions Act, we were the first in South Asia to adopt not only the UNCITRAL model law, but we upgraded ourselves to the only international treaty on the subject of electronic commerce and electronic business, which is the UN Electronic Communications Convention, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2005. So we became the first country in South Asia, second country after Singapore, and now you see Philippines, to Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Fiji, small nations included, onboarding and developing their legal framework to create trust as a digital business ecosystem using that Google. Second example.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando. But Dr. Rai, could you mute one of your devices and lower the volume on one of them? I think that's what's leading to feedback.
That's right.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was about send him a text on the same note. So the second example we have is in the area of digital crimes and cybercrime. And we can't talk of cybercrime in isolation. We have to take cybercrime in the context of gathering electronic evidence, which is required to deal with all kinds of abusive practices, including hate speech online. The data, Aditi, and the information required for any information is not in any of our territories. Electronic evidence is in multiple locations. So what are the tools that we empower judiciary, law enforcement, prosecution to deal with in order to gather the electronic evidence from multiple sources in a collaborative manner? Not 3 months, 6 months later, or 1 year later, but get it real time. That's where we believe moving in the direction of an international standard called the Budapest Convention was useful. Now,
Right.
that's one standard. There's something happening at the UN. Let that evolve. But we believe as a small country, engaging international partners through what is available, international standards which are available, is useful. Third example is in the area of privacy data protection. Again, we have the OECD privacy guidelines, you have GDPR and whatnot. What is best for our country? Let's look at all the principles available across the globe, including the APAC privacy framework, and adopt something that will help an ecosystem to evolve in line with a global standard so that countries can develop collaboration and partnerships with the global providers and systems so that our people and businesses will benefit. So that's a kind of approach that I would take when we talk of ensuring trust in these.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando. Over to you, Mr. Zabir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Before going to the trust discussion, I must mention one thing. Being a part of technical community, the internet actually built on trust. And if I talk about first 10 years of internet journey, there was no security or no kind of legal framework there, and still mostly internet actually running in the technical perspective based on trust. So, and trust only works, and the trust can be built only if we have respectful attitude to whom I'm partnering with, and we're following same norms or same protocol, then only it can work. And nowadays, everyone is connected to the internet. So many stakeholders, the government is there, the business is there, as an individual, everyone is there, and the trust we need to build. And to build trust, few things we need. We need that attitude that we respect others. We create an environment so that everybody can get their desirable output from the internet. And that environment will give good experience. And if you all behave correctly, the trust can be built. The challenge is what we see, that there are some infrastructure issue, like we are, as Dr. Sami was mentioning, the new startup coming up in the online platform. That, but question is that the platform that is coming, how good the application is, how user-friendly it is. That's first question. And on what network the service is given. It is reliable, it's trustworthy. The fintech services already came into discussion, that the financial service is actually really serving well. And if anything goes wrong, if someone doesn't perform well, then is there any legal system or judicial mechanism that it can be actually taken care of, and we can keep the right of the individual who asks for service over the internet? So it's not a single thing. It's just one infrastructure side, one is regulatory and legal requirement side, and main challenge we see that here everyone is actually trying to take their own benefits, and that's actually creating mistrust. Sami mentioned again about that misinformation on the internet. So why this misinformation is there on the internet? If we ask those questions, then things come many different reasons here. One is that normal media, the electronic media or print media, I should say, probably they're not as fast as internet. So they need to attain this speed. And secondly, second issue that the regulation or government, in many cases, the authoritarian government, they're not actually allowing the normal media to publish all the information. So then people are actually forced to go towards social media to look for information, and where it is unregulated and wrong information being disseminated. So if you want to build trust, probably I already crossed 3 minutes, but again,
Yes.
just to conclude that we need to create a respectful environment. And if we respectful to each and every one, create a proper infrastructure that is probably already almost built. So it's now about all of us, how can we build trust? And if we talk about that in a regional trust development, in that point of view, probably we all need to play in the same norms. Like I already mentioned the GDPR thing, that European created the privacy law for all individuals in that region. So probably we can think in the future for the SWAT region that we can actually really go for something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sabir. Dr. Rai, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I must apologize for the mess up which I got into that, and I could not follow some of the things. And I mean, I'm very, very grateful to the organizer for bringing me on at least virtual face-to-face to some of my friends and colleagues. Mr. Jayanto, good morning to Mr. Jayanto, to you. It's a long time since I met you. Friends, I look at it slightly different, but I would like to go towards more the last speaker, Mr. Ahmed Sabir there. Now, if you look at the digital transformation which is going on today, it is not it's not a digital transformation. It's a transformation in the digital technology. That's what I look at it there. Now, as we have gone through the digital transformation, the innovations has gone up. As we keep on innovating technologies, keep on innovating privacy, keep on innovating the regulations, which my fellow panelists have mentioned it, our issues of the online trust are also on the rise and in an exponential rise there. You talk about the hate, you talk about the cybercrime, you talk about the misinformation is on the rise there. Today, whatever we may say in the UN, whatever we have been discussing about the norms of behavior, the fact of the life is that the misinformation is part and parcel of the strategy of any country when we deal with the some other country there. That's a part and parcel there. Today we are in a convergence of era of a convergence of technologies where these things spread out like anything. Look at the artificial intelligence, look at other factors there. Now, in this scenario, let us go back and see. We have all agreed for a multi-stakeholder model of the internet. We have all agreed there. And there was whole lot of lot of cry was made. Government should not interfere here, and I have participated in a number of things. I've gone to the norms of cyber behavior in the internet world there. Actually, it's now the time has come that industry has to come forward and play its role of a significant lead player of the multi-stakeholder kind of a system which we agreed there. I mean, everybody has talked about the privacy law. Every country is putting a privacy law. Every country is putting a cyber crime law there. But I go with Mr. Sabir. ultimately trust will come up, no regulation will come up, and the way the new technology is emerging there, it is becoming very, very complex and very, very difficult to control those technologies there. You talk about metaverse, we are moving a 3 dimension. I was looking at yesterday some of the information there, how the in a satellite kind of a metaverse is playing a huge role and huge different kind of a role in the satellite kind of issues there. So I think the online trust is necessary. We can't avoid technology. We have to use technology very well, and the usage is becoming more and more prevalent there. We are dependent upon technology more and more. The only way is that apart from we need to have a regulation, we need to have a law, we need to have a treaties there. But actually, it's a code of a conduct which we need to agree, which need to be followed by industry in sacrosanct, which need to be followed by the countries in a sacrosanct kind of scenario. That's the way we will go. I am very a strong supporter of the industry to come forward, and they had to play a lead role.
Right.
Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. I think there are a few points of commonality that have emerged from all our 5 speakers. But one of the things that's really important to remember about the internet is, and this is something Mr. Nick Clegg, who's the global public policy head for Meta, said at one of the events, that the ingenuity of the internet is that it allows free flow of data. And so if you're sitting in India, or you're sitting in the United States, or you're sitting in Sri Lanka, you're looking at the same thing, you have access to the same kind of information, and therefore you can communicate and interact with each other. So when Dr. Rai, when you say that the industry has to come forward and suggest certain code of conduct, how do we account for different standards, different principles, different cultural milieu across different territories? I mean, taking the example of India, we have different understandings of what privacy means in North India versus South India, how things should function. Culturally, we are quite different across the world. So how do we expect the companies to account for that?
No, you see, it's a very complex matter there. Jayanto was referring to the GDPR. Jayanto, am I right? You are referring to the GDPR at that time, if I have heard correctly there, because I was in a bit
Yes, sir, he was.
kind of issue there.
Yes.
See, if you look at the GDPR, the European Commission says, you better follow my law. Only then I will give you recognition to GDPR. You have to interface to my law, to my GDPR. That's the expectation they expect from there. That's one there. But if you look at the norms of behavior discussion which went on in the UN, all government participated, industry didn't participate over there. Ultimately, the standard and the system need to be maintained by the industry. Since you talk about the India has been trying to evolve a SRO, self-regulatory authority for the content. Have we been able to successful? No, because not with Indian industry, because the international tech giant, they have their own model. They are opposing it there, and they are leading the country. They're leading the entire such kind internet world in the world.
So
yes.
here,
So we are not able to put a SRO, the self-regulatory authority for maintaining a content, monitoring content there. They are not able to do that. Disinformation, we are not able to stop it there. So I think it's a tech giant has to come forward and do that. We are hearing all of us. You said internet is such a medium there. Information is available, is a absolutely available instantly. We all know what is happening in the Twitter there. We all happening what is happening. Twitter is a very clear example. Very clear example. The tech giants are controlling. That's why I say any law, any regulation will be effective if the tech giants of the world, they come forward and impose a self-discipline around themselves. That's why I was supporting Mr. MS Sabi there. They have to come forward. We need to agree some code of conduct. It has to be an international code of conduct. We need to agree to that.
So I'll bring in Mr. Ahmed here, because Mr. Ahmed had said that the question then arises, do we create social media platforms in each of our countries? Do we host their data locally? And what are the repercussions of that? So, and since Dr. Rai talked about the nature of content moderation, when it comes to online content, what kind of approach do you think should be taken? Should the governments take a hands-off approach, that, hey, as Dr. Roy is suggesting, that there should be a self-regulatory body looking at all of these things, or should it be a more paternalistic approach, which India has taken through law by creation of a grievance appellate committee? And I ask this in particular to you because Bangladesh had enacted its Bangladesh Telecommunication Regulatory Commission regulation for digital social media and OTT platforms in 2021, which is very, very similar to India's IT rules, except for the fact that it doesn't have the grievance appellate committee, of course.
The thing is that, we're learning. That's the main thing. And it's not really possible for government to go in and check everything, right? Even for these tech giants, I mean, a lot of things are possible when you have AI and technology at your disposal, right? You can localize, you can check many of these things. What is interesting is that once we have started talking about data protection and all these things, we have been approached by all these tech giants, and they have started negotiating and talking to us how they can better respond to the problems that we are facing in Bangladesh on social media. So I think what Dr. Gulshan Rai said, it's very important for these tech giants and government to sit together and discuss these issues and come to a solution together. I mean, this is not something which government can do it by itself. It's not something where the tech giants can come in, because they have their own agenda, which is obviously make as much profit, and they will not look at local, regional issues as much as what affects us, right? And you rightly mentioned that, even in even in India, North India and South India has different cultures. Bangladesh is a completely different culture. How do you do it? But most of these tech giants are big enough to have regional offices. Technology has come to a point where we can definitely do some things around that. And especially with, nowadays we have NFT and blockchain, the trust issue in many of the areas with things can be addressed. So I think what's more important is to have that discussion where everybody sits together. And of course, you have mentioned a very good point, is grievance, is where the citizens can come back to the government and the authorities on the issues, and there's a feedback channel around it. But it can be done by government alone. We need these tech giants to discuss. And if they are not collaborative, then of course, there's the data privacy law that we have to enact where it enforces them to do it, or where we also focus on supporting. It could be local startups that are coming up with local social media platforms, right? Some countries have done it effectively. Does it make sense for Bangladesh to have its own? And then would the citizens, the people of Bangladesh who will be using this media, would have that trust to use the local platforms? That's also something important that we need to look at.
Right. I think I address this question to everyone here, which is that online freedom of speech, because when we are talking about trusting information online, and when we are talking about social media platforms, we cannot not talk about right to freedom of speech. And online freedom of speech in South Asia has come under immense criticism and scrutiny from both within South Asia, all of our respective countries, as well as from across the world. And a lot of censorship is actually enabled by laws in our respective countries. What would you say to that? How do we balance between the two? Mr. Sabir, if you want to go first.
Yeah, thank you. If we just touch a point that's been just discussed by Dr. Gulshan Rai and Sabiha, that the tech giants, that they should come up and they should talk with the government, is true in one hand. And there is a law in India, you mentioned the laws in Bangladesh OTT platform. If you just look at the law, you see that these laws mostly focused to actually protect the governments, not the people, if I be blunt and honest. So if your law doesn't make for the law is not pro people, then you always see this kind of challenges. And it's not that tech giants are not listening all the time. They're listening sometimes. Again, if you look at another perspective, in some country in the world, that due to this social media, as long as they are not listening to the government, only because of they're getting some information. Otherwise, those information cannot be available by any other media, any other means. So if you want to protect human rights, there should be a balance actually. And that balance has been created by the tech giant as well. As well, the government should play a reasonable way so that it can protect the human right and the privacy. So it's not privacy for the government, it's a privacy for the people we are talking about.
Right.
And where probably the laws in South Asia is missing. It's missing in Bangladesh, I have to say missing in India. And if we cannot guarantee that, then probably that trust relation cannot be built among government or the tech giant or the people.
Right.
So that is something we need to work for. And the question, can you repeat the question you asked for? I just lost it.
Sure. That there's been a lot of criticism and scrutiny around how content is posted online, the nature of censorship online in South Asia. And I think when you both Mr. Ahmed and you talk about privacy as well, there are three strands of legislation that emerge in South Asia and across the world when it comes to regulating content online. One is online content regulation, so like our intermediary rules. The second is any privacy legislation, and the third is the cybersecurity legislation or cybersecurity strategy. I actually wanted to move forward a little bit and get to the question of data localization, which has been touched upon. That is something that's not enshrined in any of our privacy acts yet. Even India has done away with the data localization requirement. But even India, in its latest iteration of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, has this idea of trusted geographies. So how do we vet those trusted geographies? And how do smaller countries that may not have as much negotiating power at a global scale go about demanding that kind of a vetting process? Mr. Fernando, if you want to take the lead on this question, since you have chaired the committee on Sri Lanka's Personal Data Protection Act.
Thank you, Aditi. And it's a very interesting question you asked about localization, which was a heavily debated topic even in our part of the world, even in Colombo. When we had the stakeholder consultations, we had 7 rounds of them through the drafting of the data protection law, which we started in 2018, 2019. What came out of our collective interactions with stakeholders, both domestically and internationally, was that we figured out quite early in the multiple stakeholder consultations that the private sector would find it easier to cooperate and collaborate if the private sector and government were on the same equal footing. So that's why you see our Data Protection Act being applicable equally to both private sector and government entities. So public corporations, public authorities, and the private sector would all be obligated when that law comes into operation to apply our data protection law equally. On the data localization debate, we had to reach a compromise because principles and policies on the subject are evolving, Aditi. So what compromise we reached was that while the private sector and government-owned business undertakings and government-owned banks included would have flexibility on cross-border data flow, government entities collecting citizen data pursuant to a legal obligation would be obligated to localize, but that's not a mandatory localization requirement. Based on data classification and categorization in consultation with the data protection regulator and the supervisory authorities, they can locate that data in a third country, provided that third country would have equivalent standards and harmonization with our norms. And that is why, Aditi, we realize the challenges with GDPR, we realize the challenges with other norms, but we came to realize quite early in the public consultation process that some of these international standards emanate from principles such as the OECD privacy guidelines and even APAC privacy framework, which are flexible. We tried our best to reach a compromise between all of it. And we are now in a situation where all partners globally are talking to us. Why? Because we hit the right compromise between the international standards
Right.
So businesses, consumers would have greater degree of trust and confidence to interact with global service providers and
Correct.
benefit from the digital development ecosystem.
So the idea being that when you are going out to vet another territory, you are being vetted yourself as well. So would you reach the benchmark? And just to
Exactly.
go over what the status of privacy regulation is in South Asia in different countries, Sri Lanka, of course, is the only one that has actually enacted its law. It was earlier this year. Nepal has an older Individual Privacy Act of 2018, but that doesn't deal with digital personal data. India released its fourth draft last month. Bangladesh released one in July. Pakistan released its draft last year. And most of them are quite similar, so to say. But Dr. Here's what I'd like to ask you. India is now focusing on creating these geographies to exchange data. What are parameters for assessing trusted geographies? Would they be same as EU's adequacy standards, A, and B, what Mr. Fernando also pointed at, that when we are vetting others, we are also being vetted. So would India be vetted favorably by other territories, including potentially Sri Lanka?
Aditi, I don't think anybody can answer your question. This is more a geopolitical question. You see, recognition nowadays is not based on my laws, on your laws, or anybody laws. It's a more geopolitical consideration. And tech is emerging as a strong geopolitical issue there. And we have seen all those things there. But I have a basic question. When the data is moving on the internet, and we are all talking about internet, even human being is also getting connected on the internet there. Can there be a localization of the data? You don't know where the data is being going there. Actually, the 13 root server, some of them are involved in routing your data. The DNS is being controlled over there. If you look at technical aspects there, the problem with our Southeast Asian countries is they're largely by there and mostly Indian also there, that we need to evolve law, regulation, policies, looking at the technological innovation. It's a difficult task, but we need to look at it there. Can you do a localization when the data is moving on internet there? If you have a one-to-one kind of a network, you can do data localized. I was also a part of the Justice B.N. Krishna committee, which evolved the framework there. I opposed that. And I pleaded before the Parliament committee, you can't do that. Look at your electric cars and there where the data is going on. It's very difficult to do that. Now, how the concept of localization starts there. If you go to the Cloud Act of the US, they say, irrespective of the country, wherever the data the American citizen lies, it is their data. Do they recognize the right of Indian or any other South Asian country the same way? Will we get it? Whole concept of data localization started because the countries, when the old tech giants, whole data is in one country there. You want a data from them, your own citizen, they say, no, our laws doesn't permit. And the whole concept of data localization started from there. And GDPR came and cemented there, you accredited the country there. So I think the whole issue of now our data protection kind of a document which you are talking about it today, recognition, these are the basic condition. What Mr. Jayant Fernando says is a basic condition there, that your standard should be same, you must follow the same kind of a protection. That's one. But ultimately, it's a geopolitical issue. It's a geopolitical issue there. I can give 10 reasons there to do that. So I think my basic issue will be what Mr. Fernando said. India will certainly, those will be the basic conditions. And it will be by any country there. But beyond that, I think we need to have it. Today, it is a need to have, because that entire technology is a pervasive technology there. We need to have a global norm for the privacy. If the India wants the data of its own citizen, why should there be a restriction there?
Right.
I mean, the restriction should happen if I ask the data of Mr. Jayant Fernandes, then there is an issue there. But if I'm asking the data of my own citizen, then what is the issue there? We cannot localize the data, whether it's India or USA there. the localization effect is coming up because these tech giants are not cooperating with your data. They are not cooperating with your law. If you order a block any misinformation, they block visibility in a particular country, but rest of the world it is visible there. So
Right.
that's why, I mean, these are all geopolitical issues which has emerged because of the tech giants there. So data localization as a principle, I think it will not get implemented in any manner strictly, looking at the nature of the technology there. So, but we had to do that. We'll have to bring out the social media to come and do that kind of a thing. You look at the cloud. Everyone has a Azure cloud. You took the AWS cloud. Yes, they set up the clouds over here, but actually, one part of the cloud is being managed and monitored somewhere outside the country. That's a
So I
state
understand
principle.
that.
That's a state principle there.
I understand the point that you're making about how the tech giants seem to have a certain kind of monopoly over data of citizens of the entire world. So it's not particular to any country. But when we're talking about trust, we're also talking about trust between the states and the citizens. And our laws in South Asia seem to give carte blanche to the states, which is something that Mr. Sabir also mentioned, that they seem to be granting the states privacy while expecting accountability from citizens. They seem to be granting states freedom of speech while expecting certain kind of kowtowing from citizens. So how do we balance that? And in that kind of a debate, it seems easier for citizens to trust an American tech giant than their own state.
No,
Especially in
Aditi, I beg to differ with you. But anyway, coming back to the issue which you have mentioned over here, the Supreme Court of India, a full bench, 9-bench judgment is there, where they lay down the 4 conditions for the state there. That is the law. Whatever document you may see, ultimately the law need to be followed in sacrosanct letter and spirit there. The law
Right.
is where there's a proportionality should be there. There should not be alternate means there. There should not be alternate means to get the data. If that is there, you better go to that there. Okay?
Yeah.
And you have to follow by law.
Hmm.
So there are 4 conditions. Whether you may write in document or not document today, but that will be followed there because that's the law of the land.
Mr.
So
Fernando, you
That's the law
want
of
to
the land. Those 4 conditional need to be followed. Essentiality, proportionality, the law, as well as there is no other ways and means to do that. It has to be followed. We have laid down the law. It will be
Right.
followed by the government or the citizen there.
Mr. Fernando, I think you want to.
yeah, Aditi, I think based on that last point you made, and based on what Dr. Gulshan Rai mentioned, I mean, it's a very interesting debate, and I would really point out as far as that Indian Supreme Court judgment is concerned, there's clarity. There is very clear guidelines. But when it comes to state and it is eventually the state, Aditi, that formulates laws and policies eventually that will govern its citizens. And then often we see this as a global pattern, not only in South Asia, where norms, standards, policies, laws are developed by governments with the mandate they have, believing they are doing the right thing by the citizens. But whereas it does not necessarily create the trust and confidence the citizen needs, and then they eventually rely on an international platform which follows a different norm. So this is a continuous friction that we see happening not only in South Asia but globally. But taking a previous question, Aditi, that you mentioned in relation to codes of practices, I want to rest my case with 2 interesting examples. We see what happened in the context of Easter Sunday tragedy in Sri Lanka and the Christchurch tragedy in New Zealand. What came out of that set of challenges was the development of the Christchurch call, a set of global norms agreed to by governments and private sector. And it is very interesting that India, Sri Lanka, and I believe other countries in the region would look at it, Nepal, Bangladesh, and others would look at it hopefully favorably. Sri Lanka, India are part of it. The Christchurch call is a classic example where private sector and governments came together. And in the context of what you mentioned about Nix, Facebook, I think you quoted
Yes,
Nix
the statement.
on the free flow of information. In the context of free flow while ensuring some standards for governance, increasingly state actors and private sector are realizing that this continuous friction is not going to work. We need to develop codes similar to the call. So Sri Lanka's latest evolution on that frontier is that we know we can't control hate speech, hate crime, online challenges alone. So the civil society have come together with private sector to develop a code of practice, what they call Safe Web LK, that is in the process of evolution. And we believe that kind of a model might ensure greater harmonization of the different set of principles international providers follow from what state actors want to enact.
Mr. Fernando, I'm really sorry for cutting you short. It's just that we have 10 minutes left. I just want to go over one question with the panelists that I have, and then we'll go to audience questions. Mr. Khanal, Dr. Rai raised an interesting point about the geopolitical aspects of a number of debates around fostering trust online. And that also takes into account the physical infrastructure involved. So physical infrastructure, not just in terms of the distribution of the internet across the world, but also where are we sourcing our hardware from? Since you head Nepal's telecommunications authority, how do you negotiate with vendors from different countries? Because I'm assuming Nepal can't make all that it needs within the territory of Nepal. What are the standards and considerations that you stick to when you are procuring equipment for your critical information infrastructure?
Thank you. We have certain guidelines for importing equipments that conform to, so far as the technical standards are concerned, it conforms to ITU standards.
Right.
But in terms of trust, there is no mechanism to test whether the entire supply chain conforms to the trust aspect of it. We don't have the capacity to even test if these equipments conform to the cybersecurity standards. So Bhagwan Bharose chal raha hai.
Right.
This is very difficult. I think one comment, when I hear the panel talking about it, the whole idea of the panel discussion that I was thinking of and the line I was taking was quite different from what this panel was leading to. So if we enter into the soft side of trust, like hate speech and misinformation, disinformation, freedom online, and privacy and all those things, and it will take a different course. It is unending discussion. So I thought when we are talking about empowered South Asia, I was thinking of empowerment in terms of economy, empowerment in terms of jobs and employment, the fundamental infrastructures that needs to be in place for a trustworthy digital services, the interaction between public and the the government and the citizens, the government services, the private services offering. But the whole discussion was the other way. I was really surprised that I think it is lack of my understanding how this panel was
No, that's not it. I think the nature of this discussion is such, the nature of the topic is such that it can go in 10 different directions, and each direction is as meaty as the other one. And all those 10 different directions just interplay into each other. So, which is why when we are talking about something like data localization, at the same time, we have to talk about physical infrastructure. How do you house huge data centers in a country like Nepal, which is prone to earthquakes?
Right. Yeah. That's
So,
see, when we are talking about the necessity of the cloud infrastructure, cloud as a service, cloud as a platform, and all those things, it's economy, it's efficiency, and the whole lot of skills that has gone into the investment it has gone into. If we talk about data localization in a small country like Bhutan or Sri Lanka or Nepal or Maldives, then it doesn't work. Nobody invests in Nepal.
and
What
that's
is
where
the
that's
that,
where
that
trust becomes important,
yeah,
because then
that's what
smaller nations are potentially are more reliant on
right.
bigger nations, and how do those asymmetries of power then play out? So that was the idea. But I'm so sorry, we have to go to audience questions now. We have a few in chat already. The first is, what do you think is the role of civil society in this dialogue? I think this dialogue refers to creating a code of conduct by negotiating between, say, big tech companies and government. Anyone who wants to take that?
Yeah. So,
Yes, Mr. Fernando.
so I think when I finished off on my last round, we were exactly on that. My view is that civil society would play a lead role in facilitating that process that would ensure better governance, better, maybe a better trust ecosystem. So on that, what I would end is the fact that in Sri Lanka, the latest development is that civil society have come together with the private sector and developing a code of practice to deal
Mr. Fernando, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Dr. Rai, can you please mute yourself? I think it's leading to feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. So the civil society have come together in Sri Lanka with private sector and with the technical insights from global service providers. They are developing a set of principles that will get hardened into a code of practice. They call it the Safe Web LK initiative. It is built on the foundations of what we see in Australia and New Zealand, taking also a precedent and maybe learning from the lessons learned from the industry code of practice on harmful content that was started in the European Union in 2016. So that is an example of where civil society can take a lead in collaborating with the private sector to get something that will done that will create greater trust and confidence for end users. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Rai. Sir, can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you, Aditi. I entirely agree with my friend, Mr. Fernando. But I have one more suggestion. See, the entire internet today has a better market in the countries which are all representing today on the screen today there. That's a larger market, and this has the potential to create a and this all our South Asian countries should come together, create a framework. The problems are similar, the issues are similar among all the countries. I think this is high time, looking to the numbers there, which we all contribute, South Asian countries, we need to come forward and create a framework there together with the civil society, and then tell the tech giant better follow this kind of a thing. But that should be a practical kind of a framework. So this is a high time. I propose that with the all Asian countries, all South Asian countries, because of similarity in conditions, economical, social, everything together, they should come together, evolve a practical, implementable, oriented kind of framework, and then implement it.
Almost
At
like
least we should have some those kind of a understanding with each other. Both whether it's a promotion or it's a regulation or kind of a thing, we must have interfaceable. You look at the EU, they have their own kind of a thing. You look at the Far East countries, CBPR, they have their own kind of issues, so they come together.
Yes,
So
APEC.
of the South Asian countries, which we are now, representing on the screen today, we may bring few more also. Come forward, try to evolve a common standard, common framework, looking to our social condition, acceptable to include civil society, and then do that. And that should be the spirit, in my view, whether we go for a norms of behavior in UN
Dr. Rai,
or
I'm
any
really
other
sorry
issue.
for interrupting you.
Just a minute. That's a good idea. That's a utopian wish. You see the fate of SARC. The meeting has not been conducted for so many years. How can you think that we have similar thoughts, we have similar cultures and all this? That doesn't happen, in a political and even civil society. They're so fragmented. Diversity is the norm. I don't think that this works. No way.
I think that's our answer to EU's Digital Services Act, GDPR, and Digital Markets Act completely thrown out of the window. I'll take one last question from the audience. I'm sorry we don't have time for more. Is there a way to build a unique online identity for a user, just like we have in the physical world, such as an Aadhaar card, passport, etc.? Will it bring more trust online? I think the idea here is to ask whether tying online identities to provable artifacts would actually help foster trust online. Mr. Ahmed, if you want to take that.
I mean, of course, that's the experimentation that's going on right now with the metaverse, right? That's what, with technology, people are trying to bring in unique identities to not just people, but also to, assets online. And it's an experiment that's working so far, and we'll have to see how it goes around. But definitely it's required. It's something that we'll see more of as it goes by. And definitely everybody will need to have their own digital, which we already have. As a matter of fact, we have experimented with email for the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? That's sort of a digital identity that everybody has, a unique identity. And so as we go forward, everybody having their own unique avatars online, that's something we might see. These are things that technology will bring about. And then, of course, that will bring about a totally new question about data privacy and how, when you're online, you're basically a global citizen. You're no longer, are you bounded by borders, or are you part of some other world and what laws does that world follow? And I think that's going to be a very complex discussion that's going to come up in the near future. But definitely, we will be able to do that.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions and more discussion. I think all of us have a lot to say about everything, not always agreeing with each other. But thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Sabir, Mr. Khanal, Mr. Fernando, and Dr. Rai. This was a great session. Thank you, IGF, for hosting the session and having us. And have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi, and everyone in the panel. It was really an interesting discussion, and hope we can have it further later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.